The live format's a little different from the podcast. I've done several podcasts. I've been on quite a few. Yeah. And one of the key differences, and this was the other thing that prompted it. I'm sorry, this is a very long answer, but
no, that's good.
there was actually a lot of thought that went into it. Yeah. The other thing that I liked about that format is that it's live, so people can ask questions or chime in. Some people joke, or people say all kinds of things. It has its glitches. It's not perfect. I think Instagram's not the ideal format for that, but it's been fun at least, and I think people are enjoying them. So I've been doing that, but it doesn't have the interview format that say a podcast does, right, or radio or a magazine interview or that sort of thing. So anyway, that's what that was, and I'm going to continue doing them, and every couple weeks or so I'll do one with a friend or a colleague. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm in some ways, compared to you, I'm like right at the beginning of having some kind of social media presence, and it has been a slow trickle. And I think a lot of things have changed from like 5 or 6 years ago, where maybe you can build up like a big following quickly. It's really like a slow trickle right now. And one of the conversations I had about with somebody who does fairly well in terms of monetizing and is like a real true artist. It's actually the person who wrote the intro music to this podcast named Kevin McAndrews, and he goes by Numb the Geek, and he's one of the truest like artists I've ever known. He just loves music. He does it for no other reason than loving it. And the idea of making any money for it is like entirely secondary, and sometimes even almost problematically. Sometimes I'm like, Kevin, please make some money from this. But he has sort of but he has sort of figured something out, and he's made this kind of like, we talked about it for a while, and he's made this kind of triangulation where he's used several different platforms to sort of point at each other. And that's the thing, like something like Discord, for instance, is like an online platform that's much more like communicative and more like a hangout session, almost like Google Group or Google Chill or whatever that was like 5 years ago. So online conversations might be well had on something like Discord, whereas like Instagram is more like people watching, but the interface for like asking questions and things like that isn't as smooth, I think, in Instagram. But all this stuff takes a social media manager. It's like you have to really develop this stuff. It's not easy. So
it's not easy, but I do feel that it's a necessary thing for creatives. In so many ways, I think. First of all, because the creative economy is much bigger than just where you live. Even if you're in New York City, the creative capital, at least for the fine art world, it's a much bigger ecosystem, and it's an ecosystem that's far more diverse than you can even imagine in your own home. And that's one of the great advantages of it. And I think if you're creative today, you're not only is it beneficial to your creative life, but your career to be on these platforms. The problem, of course, is they weren't invented for us.
Right.
They were invented. These things were not designed for people like you and me. Yeah. I'm fortunate in that I got on to these things right at the time when people were starting to utilize them for their creative pursuits. And so I got enough of a following that there's some momentum, but it is slowing down, and that's because of the algorithms and whatever. But I do think that I'm grateful for these platforms. I'm not one of these people who's sort of like angry at Instagram or Facebook because they don't do what I want them to do. They weren't designed for me. I'm an interloper in a way. That isn't. And so I'm very grateful for the fact that they've connected to me these two people, and it's made money for me in other ways. Maybe not quite as easily as somebody who's a musician, for example, like your friend, but I have found them beneficial to be on them and active. It's a bit exhausting. It's another job, but it is enjoyable as well. So it's how to monetize it. It's a whole other matter.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it seems to me like that the concept that I've grasped onto is that pointing thing, and the thing about being an individual artist is that the amount of people pointing at you in a day versus, like, let's say, I don't know, like a brand that has marketing strategies and has like maybe several Instagram pages that are pointing at each other and things like that. So you notice the algorithm just went from like, interaction, like comments meaning less and hearts meaning less, to like sharing and saving meaning more. So that kind of shift, means that you have to be working kind of, in concert with a couple people or a couple groups. So the idea that, as an individual, you can just sprout, I think is less and less.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and think about this. When did we meet? We met probably 2010,
something like that.
9.
Yeah.
Would we? Could you imagine having this conversation back then? It's kind of amazing when you think about it, that this has become so integral to what we do.
Yeah, we didn't have any kind of conversation like that. It wasn't anything to do with it. Yeah.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I resisted these things for quite a while.
Yeah, sure.
And because I didn't want to get bogged down in it. Right. And now it's become just another part of life, the creative life. Yeah. But I do think I think that, whether these platforms are aware of it or not, I think creatives are really they're the leaven, right? They're leavening the bread. This is like, I think that they may not be aware of this, but we, just like everything else, we're going into the rundown areas and gentrifying it.
Right.
We're like, we really are. I think this, there's, because real content, the real interesting content, creative content is what's going to last.
Yeah. Right.
Not what I had for breakfast and took a picture of. Right. Unless I'm a chef.
Right.
And then,
exactly.
then it might be, then it might be that has some cultural value because it can spread in unique ways. But I do think that we are, we're providing a service. That's the way I like to, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, it's strange that's like almost the start of every conversation now is, how are we navigating this odd space that really isn't the physical act of making things, but is necessary to it.
Exactly. Yeah. And 20, 50, 60 years ago, that had something to do with somehow being chosen or identified by these higher powers that, hopefully they like you, hopefully they choose you and they show you and they represent you. Right. And if you're in their good graces, then you're good. And if you're not, then you never are. Right. And, I think in some ways I might prefer it how it is now, because at least there's some autonomy to it, and the ways in which we're married and bound to basically art market stuff, this is another conversation, but art is not art market, right? Like, I mean, it's two totally different things. I was talking with one of my students introducing this concept, and I said, well, like, being a fish is not the same thing as the person eating a fish, right? It's like, what it means to be a fish is much different than what it means to have a fish be eaten. And, so I find like there's quite a bit of autonomy to it and quite a bit of interconnectivity that obviously was never there, or was just completely controlled by someone else. And I enjoy that. But it's murky waters like anything.